Welcome to Meaningful Journeys, a podcast about pilgrimage. I'm Dr. Heather Warfield, and I am passionate about connecting humanity through our shared quests for meaning. In this podcast, I'll be talking with pilgrims and pilgrimage scholars. I will have conversations with people impacted by both ancient and contemporary pilgrimage journeys, and we will also hear from people who live at these sacred sites. This program is supported in part by Antioch University, New England, and the Meaningful Life Institute. I'm joined on this episode by Christian Clifford, who has written extensively about topics related to Catholic history and the Catholic experience. And we're going to start by talking about his most recent book, which is called Pilgrimage in Search of the Real California Missions. And then weave in some of the past writings he's done, as well as his own experience as a Catholic historian and maybe other parts of his Catholic identity. So, Christian, why in 2021, why at that point did this book called Pilgrimage seem like everything was coming together to publish this?
So I want to say 2018, I started my pilgrimage, and I was reading your article, your essay on the pilgrim in a developmental context and pilgrimage as developmental experience, a psychological lens. And I really liked how that you presented the stages. So the decision to embark on the pilgrimage was my father-in-law in the Philippines passed away suddenly. And my wife and son got on a flight probably a day or two later to go to the Philippines. And I remained behind because of work issues. A year later, I would go and pay respect at his gravesite and so on. But long story short, I was sitting there maybe a day or two after my family had left. And I said, boy, am I bored without them. At the time, I think my son was about 10. And the house was very quiet. And I remembered a Facebook group that I'd met actually in person, some members, and at a California missions conference a couple of years before, called the California Mission Walkers, this group of Catholic and non-Catholic people who really like to walk between the 21 California missions in California, from San Diego in the south all the way to Sonoma in the north. And I came across their Facebook page, and I'm like, well, that sounds like something that can keep me busy. And I said, how hard can it be? I was in the Navy. I'm a veteran, and I was a Boy Scout. I'm one of 6 boys. So I went through a lot of, hazing growing up, and, real machismo family, and went to an all boys Catholic high school that I teach at now. And I said, I'm going to go do it. And I got my pack ready. I drove up to Sonoma. The book I present from Sonoma in the south, San Diego in the south to Sonoma in the north, just for ease, for people to kind of follow in their minds geographically easily. But in reality, I started in Sonoma, and I kind of did it in bits and pieces until I put it all together. Yeah, about 800 miles. And oh boy, it was a Friday evening, got in the car, had my backpack with water and some snacks, and it was a very short walk from Sonoma, the last mission founded by the Franciscan friars in California in the 1820s. And I walked to Petaluma, probably about 10 miles that first leg. And I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to get hit by a car. My feet were so blistered. It was, every step hurt. So I didn't know if I had it in me to do eventually 800 miles, but miraculously, I got a second wind the next day, had some breakfast, and I continued on my journey until a friend could pick me up just north of San Rafael in Marin County. And because the public bus from from Petaluma back to my car, and only 7 miles. Would have taken like 2 hours to get to my car. So it all worked out. And as I went along, I got to meet new people in the group. I walked with some of them. A lot of advice was given. And I kept little blogs along the way. And I took those and I converted them into notes to put into a book. But the book is kind of, it's not a guidebook per se on the California Mission Trail. There's a little bit about that, a little bit about my personal journey, but a lot of, like, you can see the subtitle is In Search of the Real California Missions because of the controversy. One of the things that I've noticed in my research is they're almost a silent voice in all of it are Catholic Native Americans, and especially Mission Indians and the descendants of the Mission Indians. They don't seem prominent at all in the interviews in secular newspapers when that whole controversy stems up about California mission history and colonialism. So in my research, I walk with the indigenous, the Spanish, the Mexican, Californian in this journey, because every segment from mission to mission has a story of one of them. And they're very powerful stories. And you have to dig deep to do research on them, but they exist and they're very powerful. And I think it really gets people who are open to learning. It kind of rethinks the mission narrative that they consume through popular media. Yeah.
I think it would be certainly useful for me, and probably to many of our listeners, to go to a very basic history of the California missions,
Sure.
because what is surrounding you for many people, we are
Yeah.
either just detached from, or we don't even know the history of the California missions.
Yeah. So 1769, actually, I have to go back further than that. So the reason why the Spaniards even mapped out California is the Spanish galleons coming from Manila. The winds would push them north and they'd make landfall here in California on their way to Acapulco in Mexico. And they needed fresh water. So they had some limited interaction with natives. And, they continue on their way to Acapulco, offload the silks and spices from Asia across the Mexico to the Caribbean, and then back on galleons to sell to Spain. So that goes back to the mid 16th century. A few explorers had mapped it out, and basically all the maps and intelligence went into archives somewhere in Madrid. And fast forward to 1768, about that time, and the new intelligence coming to Madrid to the King of Spain was, hey, the British are kind of intruding on our lands that we traditionally said are ours, and also the Russians a little bit. So the King of Spain said, let's get boots on the ground. And he sent what historians refer to as the sacred expedition. You had the church and the state, the military and the Franciscan priests coming up here to California. And really the idea was to convert the natives so that they would become automatically Spanish citizens. So back in St. Petersburg, back in London, the Spanish ambassadors can say, hey, our people are there, stay away, right? But before then, there really wasn't, right? There were just native peoples living their lives and so on. That, historically, their ancestors did have very limited interaction with Spanish explorers and, Spanish galleon sailors that came on shore to get water and food and stuff. But that being said, 1769, Friar Junipero Serra, Franciscan priest from Majorca, Spain, he was evangelizing native Catholics who were already Catholic, but they kind of didn't have a priest around, so they kind of reteaching them in the Sierra Gorda part of right north of Mexico City. he was given the task to go to Baja California because in the geopolitical scene at the time, the Jesuits, that religious order in the Catholic Church, was becoming so influential that a lot of laymen, Catholic laymen who were landowners, felt like they were getting in the way of their opportunity for wealth, I guess. And they really said to the king, they lobbied to get the Jesuits expelled. So basically, they were all called back to Europe. And the last part of the Spanish Empire and the Jesuits in the Spanish Empire to be called back were in Baja California, where they had been for some time. They set up over 21 missions, I forget the number, over about a 100-year period. And the Franciscans took over because they were seen as more loyal to the crown. And Serra was there for about a year. And then he got the okay to lead the expedition to what then was called New California, Nueva California. And Baja California, which we know today, then was called Old California. So he came to San Diego July 1st, 1769. He would eventually found the first 9 of the 21 California missions. And then his predecessor, Father Lasuen, will found the next 10. So, and then the last 2 were by some other Franciscans later, just about when the Mexicans revolted and kicked Spain out. It's just about that time frame. So in California, the majority of native Californians, which I think most historians argue are about 300,000 pre-contact, did not come into contact with the Spaniards. The Spaniards' sphere of influence was about, like I said, 800 miles north to south and about 50 miles inland. That was really the extent. And California is, huge. So the coastal area up to San Francisco, Sonoma, that area. And I'd say about 1 out of 3 were in contact with the mission system. And of course, we know, like most of the history at that time, when the Europeans, be them Catholic or not, interacted with the natives, they didn't have the immunity system. Whereas back in Europe, like Junipero Serra on the island of Majorca, about 50 years, 60 years before his own birth, a large number of the island was killed due to disease and so on. So his family, his ancestors built up immunity to that stuff and survived it. And of course, we know that for a fact with COVID, right? I mean, we're dealing with that in some capacity. Thank God that's kind of seems like winding down and so on. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of the overall general story of the Spaniards in California.
And have the missions been inhabited from the beginning, from their first origin?
No. So there's 2 stories that are kind of generally out there, which are both are not good stories. They're myths, right? You have the Garden of Eden myth, which tends to be in Native American circles or activists for Native Americans, like, boy, oh boy, if those Spaniards never came, we'd be living a perfect world. Everything would be great. The Garden of Eden myth. But then you have the also opposite that. The extreme would be the California mission myth of like, oh boy, if the Spaniards never came, they would have never had a steady supply of food source. They wouldn't have, it was inevitable just how world history was going. And, you look around modern California and a lot of the things we have are thanks to the Spaniard, that kind of mentality. So it's more complex than both those stories. And it was a tough go. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There were some revolts early on. Natives came to the missions for many different reasons. One was protection, from their enemies. One was that steady food supply. Another was sincere faith. Hey, this message is so much different and new, and I like the Christian message. So it really ran the gamut. And when you look at California mission history, the 21 missions each one has kind of its own unique history, like California's in a horrible drought right now. And, there are certain pockets that they had a good supply, where another mission was in a drought. Their crops weren't doing well, and they'd help each other. They'd help each other. So they're almost like little microcosms with their own little history, their own successes, their own challenges. Generally speaking, you had 2 priests at each mission, and you had anywhere between 6 to 8 soldiers. So, and then of course you had hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of Native American converts. So, uh, I, if they wanted to kill them, if they were that bad, they could have done it overnight. They really could have. I know some people make the argument like, oh, psychological coercion and things like that. I don't know how strong that argument is. In the roughly 50 years that the Spaniards were in California, you had 142 Franciscan priests serve the Native American communities in the missions, and 2 were murdered. 2. One very early on in San Diego, who was actually very liked. His name was Father Jaime. He was bludgeoned to death. They couldn't even recognize his face. They beat him so badly. I know that doesn't sound like he was well liked, but he really was well liked, but not, I guess, by the people that did that to him. And then later on at Mission Santa Cruz, in kind of near the San Francisco Bay Area, there was a priest there that supposedly was pretty mean. It came later through interviews of people, their children at the time, kind of thing, that he was not a nice guy and that he was killed in his sleep, even though they actually had a trial to find out if that was true, the Spaniards, and they could not find any evidence that was true, that he was murdered. So yeah, you had 2 kind of juxtaposing stories there regarding him.
Is one of the missions San Juan Capistrano?
Yes, that's
This
down
is
in Orange
so,
County.
I have completely forgotten about this. I visited twice as a child with my parents. This is where the swallows return, right?
That's right. That's right.
Well, so what's the story about the swallows? I mean, now I'm like rethinking, wait a second, maybe my contact with even with the ideas of pilgrimage happened in
Yeah.
a different context than I had thought about it until you're talking about this, and then I realized I've actually been to at least one of these missions.
Well, I'm wearing my missions shirt. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, well, I
And
see. I've been trying to
I don't
figure out. I
know.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Here's
okay.
San Juan Capistrano. Here's San Luis Rey, San Francisco de Assis. And it's down here, way down at the bottom. So Mission San Juan Capistrano. I'm not a real expert on the whole swallow thing, but the swallows do return there at a certain time of year, and they make little homes that they live in and breed and all that fun stuff. And I think there's a really popular song in the 1920s sung about it, so it became kind of a part of Americana, and it's a very popular mission in terms of attendance. I want to say like 1.5 million people visit a year. It's the number 1 out of the 21, that's for sure, in terms of visitors. And interestingly enough, they don't even have a mission because the grounds are really well kept and beautiful gardens. But the church itself, the mission church, was like the tallest thing west of the Mississippi for some time. It was built, I think, only after 2 years of it being built. And of course, that was Indian labor, mission Indian labor, right? Mainly with Spanish artisans and so on. And it was destroyed in an earthquake like a year or 2 after it opened. It's called the Great Stone Church. It's massive, and only remnants of it remain. It's very beautiful, but it ended up killing a couple dozen of mission Indians who were actually in the church praying. I think they were at mass or praying at the time. So it's very tragic too. But right next door is the Mission Basilica, San Juan Capistrano. It's a modern church, and it was basically built on the kind of floor plan of the Great Stone Church. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, it's a really great mission to visit.
I remember it being beautiful, and I also remember being incredibly indignant that on our vacation, we had to stop there because my parents were interested, and
Yeah,
my sister and I, we wanted to be at SeaWorld, or,
sure.
it's a Knott's Berry Farm or something. And so when we had to stop there, and this was like a day of our vacation, we couldn't believe it. And I remember, complaining about why we had to do this. So
Yeah,
thanks a lot, Christian. You've brought up all
sure.
of these like family of
Oh
origin
my gosh.
memories for me. But I do remember the mission, it being very beautiful. And
Hmm.
then I remember, I think there's a reference in a movie. I want to say it's Dumb and Dumber or something. They talk about the swallows returning, and it's so random and has nothing to do with this podcast. But I'm also remembering there's some line
Yeah.
about it in a movie.
And you know what's really cool about Mission San Juan Capistrano too is that there's a chapel there, which is original, and historians can verify that Saint Junipero Serra actually celebrated mass there. They call it the Serra Chapel, and it's the only place that historians can say Sarah was here. So that's kind of
Oh, that's
cool
interesting.
for pilgrims, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And of course at Mission Carmel is where he's buried, so we all know
yeah,
he's there. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So when people, I mean, obviously there are visitors, like, I don't think we were going to see where Sarah did a mass. That wasn't a part of our family narrative. But do you think that that is what draws so many people there, or is it just because it's in a really beautiful location?
I think both. I really think both. Yeah. Um, it runs the gamut why people go in the first place, I think. I do think they're very good also with communications, and I think they've been around for a long time. They have a lot of army of volunteers who love the place. One of them is a friend of mine who is in the California Mission Walkers. His name's Jerry, and he's a volunteer tour guide there. And he hosted me, he and his wife, one night when I was walking through that area from Mission San Juan Capistrano to Mission San Gabriel through the LA Basin. And yeah, we had a great conversation about it. People just love it. They love the missions. They love the history. Sometimes I do think that I brought it up earlier, you know, the mission myth, it's romanticized and so on. But like it or not, whoever you are, 19 of the 21 missions are still Catholic parishes, you know, and they're places of worship. And there's the stories of people being baptized there, getting married there, having loved ones buried out of there. And that's what we have in common with the Catholics who came before us, the mission Indians and so on. Their story is our story, you know, those things don't go away. They remain. So it's very powerful.
I want to hear about, so you've talked about the individual missions, and I recognize that people may go to one mission, and that's a pilgrimage in and of itself. The you visiting
Mhm.
one mission, for a couple of hours or a day. And then there's this whole other bigger thing that you're talking about, which is walking from mission to mission,
Yeah.
which is extraordinary. And first of all, the distance is extraordinary. Second of all, what are there accommodations? I mean, I recognize California has, I mean, it's very, there's a lot of
Mhm.
cities and villages. But what happens like logistically if you're walking from mission to mission and someone wants to do this in one continuous journey? How is that
Yeah.
possible?
So the California Mission Walkers, they started, I want to say 2008, around that time. And since then, let's see, let me look at my little Compostela of sorts here. I have a little certificate of completion. I was number 49 who had finished. So I also have they also have like a little passport book. It's kind of like the Santiago de Compostela, which a lot of them have done before. And they have little stamps at each mission. But on there is a great thing. You can they have a file with names and emails and where they live, and you can reach out to them and say, hey, you know, I'm going to be in the area. I'm going to be walking. This is my itinerary. and people will, sorry, I can't, I'll pray for you, or you'll be in my thoughts, or I'd like to meet you. Can I walk with you a little bit? Some missions have like an ambassador. It's somebody kind of in the community who is like the head person to contact. And other times I'd stay with people like that, or I would stay in a motel, which is affordable. Or, of course, when I was in the area here in my backyard, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, I take public transportation and then kind of end up close to home, and my family would come and get me. Uh, I kind of alluded to this. I have a map here of California. I don't know, it's pretty hard to see, but I had it on the wall in my home, and I would mark the areas that I did so I didn't repeat, and I kind of could visually see what I needed to do, when I could do it. I was very practical about it. Like my colleague just went on his 5th pilgrimage in Spain, and he did the traditional one from southern France there to
The Camino Frances.
yes.
Yeah.
And he said that was 500 miles. He did in like 45 days, 50 days or something like that. And he stays at those little places along the way. There's no infrastructure like that in California, and it's really built around that because it's so old. But in California, it's so modern. So there's only one night where I had it was actually 2 nights. I slept outside in a tent, and that was near Mission San Antonio de Padua, which was founded by St. Junipero Serra, is I think the 3rd of the 9 that he founded. And that's really the remotest, and I think the most authentic, because it's Highway 101, which goes all the way from Washington State down. It's a California highway, and it's the major thoroughfare here in the Bay Area. It's called the Bayshore Freeway. It's like 25 miles off of the 101, or Highway 101, in a very isolated, remote part of California. And it's right on an Army Reserve base, like the biggest one west of the Mississippi, called Fort Hunter Liggett. It's right next door. And that was so remote that I actually brought a backpack with me when my brother and I did a portion together. And it was really awesome because the stars were out, and I remember the coyotes. There must have been, it sounded like hundreds of coyotes at like 3 a.m, just howling. It seemed like they were right next to our campsite. And I thought to myself, this must be what Junipero Serra and the other friars, when they were walking from mission to mission or traveling from mission to mission, must have felt like. They must have heard coyotes, the ancestors of those coyotes. It's really powerful. It's really cool. But that was really the only time I really had to rough it. You had to rough it.
So a lot of people talk about the importance of other people, other pilgrims. And I've heard you talk about some of the mission volunteers or members of the California Walkers, California Mission Trail Walkers. Did I say that
California
right?
Mission Walkers.
Mission Walkers.
CMW.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was trying to get the acronym right as I was saying it.
Sure.
I knew I was messing it up.
Sure.
That they can be sometimes part of the pilgrimages. What other type? So, do you have many encounters with strangers who are not pilgrims, but they're just people who are along the way?
Yeah, I did. And it's funny. I recall one of your earlier questions. There were a few people that have done I think it's like 5 from beginning to end, just one full swoop. They call it a throughway. It's probably more than 5. And I know of one who now he's a Catholic priest. At the time, I think he was a professed religious. And he did it without a penny because Franciscans can't have any personal wealth. And somebody donated a plane ticket for him. He flew from Cincinnati to San Diego, and he got off and he walked without a penny. And I think he has really powerful stories of people, strangers, really kind of showing the what we have in common in our human condition. It's really powerful stories. I, on the other hand, is kind of planned out. It's very practical. I kind of said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this all on my own. And eventually I reached out to people, and it made it so much better of an experience, walking with people. And so I guess I had the best of both worlds, because sometimes it's really nice to be quiet too, while you're walking out there with your own thoughts and praying, and without any obstructions. So I don't offhand strangers. One of my favorite stories is, there's always that I make a couple of references to them in my book, but I think one of my favorites was I was walking towards Mission San Juan Capistrano, north from the south, and I was at a stoplight waiting for the light to change, and maybe about a mile from the mission, my destination, and this group of little kids, bike riding, they were waiting. They rode up to the light with me, and they're standing there and they're looking at me, and I must have looked like a weirdo, and sweating and hot and pack and poles and big hat. And they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm walking to the mission." "Oh yeah? Uh, from where?" And I'm like, "Well, I started in San Diego." And they're like, "What? You're crazy." So that was really kind of a fun little experience, having that conversation with the kids. Yeah, because I'm a high school teacher. I've taught little kids, middle school age too. So it kind of reminded me of when I taught middle school kids. They're fun age. Their
And
reaction to stuff.
they probably were thinking, you're doing this by choice. Like,
Yeah, I
I
know.
don't get
I
it. What are you
know.
doing?
Yeah, are you being paid for this? No.
How have you found the pilgrimages? Because you've had many, and I'm going to get into some of the other things that you've done in a second. How has that impacted or affirmed or challenged your Catholic faith and your Catholic identity?
Um, well, I would think that it really helped me be more patient. And I'm Irish Catholic. I grew up in a big family, and sometimes I think that the personality traits that I grew up with, the Irish temper and things like that, they're not helpful. They're not helpful, especially when teaching young people. You got to be really patient. So I kind of wrestled with that, through the years, and this process helped me reflect upon that a lot, because you got to be patient. You're forced to be patient. Um, Sometimes I'd walk over a marathon a day, over 26 miles. And to get to your destination, it's a journey. It really is a journey. And you got to be patient with yourself, with others. And I have work to do. I still have work to do. But to be aware, I think that's a really important place to start, to be aware. Um,
Do you feel like you are that pilgrimages have helped you better understand Catholicism, or does the Catholicism help you understand the pilgrimage, or maybe it's symbiotic?
oh yeah. I think you brought that up in that essay I referred to earlier. It really was symbiotic. One of the things that was really great was when I went to Mission San Fernando Rey de España, which is in the San Fernando Valley, just over the hill from the LA Basin. And there was a baptism being performed, right? And it was like a couple of babies and I think an adult and a couple of teens were being entered into the church. And it was just I just walked in, and I was way in the back, and it was a really overwhelming, I don't know, I guess in a Catholic sense, this sense of the Holy Spirit at work, that I am part of something that is so ancient and so much a part of people's being. And this sense of community was so profound. I know people get that in a lot of different ways. I mean, I just went to the Killers concert at the Chase Center in San Francisco. You can almost get that feeling a little bit at a concert, right? I mean, everyone's there because they like Brandon Flowers and the Killers, right? But I think the Catholic experience is just so much bigger than that. There's something so much deeper than going to a sporting event or and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And, we have that in common and we like the game. But yeah, to me, it's much deeper, just much more profound. And I really sensed that at that moment. You were bringing up the Knights of Columbus earlier. They got wind of my pilgrimage, and they did a video of it. It's about interestingly enough, it took a camera crew who is contracted with the Knights of Columbus. They're called Spirit Juice out of Chicago. They flew out. This is during COVID, and I think it was a 4-person team with all their equipment, and we spent the weekend together, almost like 16 hours of filming, and they condensed the story down to 5 minutes. And it's a really nice little video of, I think, the spiritual experience in a nutshell of what I got.
Is that publicly available?
Yeah. You just you put my name in, Christian Clifford, Knights, and I think it'll come right up. Or even put my name, Christian Clifford, and you go to videos, and that'll be one of the videos that comes up. I think it's called Walking in the Footsteps of Saint Junipero Serra. But that was pretty neat, having a video crew following me and stuff like that for a weekend and getting the story out there to more people. Because I think you referred to it earlier. It's like, you could do, if you're physically incapacitated, you could do a virtual pilgrimage to these great sites, spiritual sites of worship, and in your own community. Let's say, I mean, I never thought I could do 800-mile walk. Never. And it just took, that situation in my life to say, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to try it, and I really challenged myself physically, mentally, spiritually, and was pretty surprised at what I could accomplish. I really surprised myself. But let's say, oh, you know what? I'm not there yet. You could do maybe one in your own community. Let's say there's, in my case, 2 Catholic churches 2 miles apart from each other, or a Catholic church and 3 miles away is a really historical place that has something to do with local Catholic history. You could do a pilgrimage between those places and almost create the pilgrimage yourself, like learning about the history and, okay, what prayers would be appropriate to recite, or actions, symbolic actions to take. Like I incorporated in my book, from Santiago de Compostela with the Iron Cross, right? The rock, and writing an intention, a petition there, what's weighing you down. And I did that at Mission Sonoma, and I just got an email from somebody who had read my book, and she was in Los Angeles, and she drove to a few of the missions, and she ended up, thanks to my book, she said, and did the little sacred, wrote a petition and left it there to kind of unburden herself. So that was really nice to hear.
There is something about being in the space where other people have left something from their heart, whether it's a prayer, a petition, or gratitude, or something that is really, really personal. And then seeing, then when we walk into that space and see that and then leave, it's really powerful. To be able to share in like this continuity of humanity, to know that even through time and distance, we can connect even when we aren't physically present.
Yeah, years ago, this is going back, I want to say like 1999, before I even thought of these things, going on a pilgrimage. I kind of had that experience in Montreal. I was with my dad, and we went to St. Joseph Oratory, which is this huge Catholic church high up on Mount Royal. And I remember a couple things. One, you take these steps all the way up to the oratory, the church, and people are going up these steps on their knees, and they're reciting the rosary. And I'm like, well, that's not something I'm accustomed to out of California. But I'm like, teach their own. If a person wants to do that, that's their thing. And then we walk into the oratory, and there's this room where people for over 100 years brought the items that were connected to the miracle that they're attributing to the intercession of Saint Joseph. And there's all these items in this room, crutches, wheelchairs, and that was really powerful, because it kind of a nice connection with what you were saying there.
Yeah, and I didn't know about this. This is in Montreal.
Yeah, Montreal.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm always fascinated when people leave the artifacts after, because it's, in some ways sort of like anthropological proof or something that the miracle or the intercession happened.
That's right. Yeah. That's I'm pretty sure that's a pretty big pilgrimage site for Catholics in North America. Yeah.
I was in Montreal a couple of years ago, and I think I went on to the outside of the church, but there was such a long line I didn't go inside. So I don't. Now I'm kind of kicking myself that I didn't have that experience. So I guess I'll have to go back.
Yeah, it's a great city.
So, in addition to the book that we've been talking about, you have published several other books, and I'd like to hear a little bit about those and how those fit into your own pilgrimage.
So, it's more of a started out with like an intellectual pilgrimage. As I said, I teach juniors and at a Catholic high school, all boys. And right when Pope Francis announced back in January 2015 that he would come to the United States to canonize Saint Junipero, in the media right away, it was just, the controversy. He was nothing good came of that, and why are you canonizing him? That whole thing. So, of course, my students were confused, because I talk about Saint Junipero all the time, or Junipero all the time. The school I teach at's named after him, and so some of the guys really were sincerely confused, like, hey, I'm getting mixed messages here. So I ended up writing a book mainly directed to high school aged youth on, it's called Saint Junipero, Making Sense of the History and Legacy. That's the subtitle, to help young people make sense of it. And I just follow the historical method that I teach young people as a history teacher. And as a researcher, you gotta be open to what you're going to encounter. And for the most part, my previous understanding was pretty good. It's pretty substantiated through the evidence by historians, because I was well aware of what people who are against him, their arguments. And so that brought me a lot of confidence, like, wow, after a lot of research, is this story that's out there is not, it's not set in stone, that's for sure. And I think it comes from a real place of pain and anger, and I recognize that. But when you talk to historians and archaeologists and really experts in this field, you don't hear that story, interestingly enough. Yeah. So I wrote that book, and I think the timing was very right, because it did very well for a self-published book. And the second book I did traditionally through a small publishing house out of Phoenix area. And it's called Who Was Saint Junipero? My son at the time was like 8 years old. He loved these books called Who Was books. Who was Magellan? Who was Anne Frank? Who, you name it. And he goes, Dad, you should write one called Who Was Saint Junipero? And I had a lot of fun writing that, because it's in California, fourth graders have to do, they study this part of history, colonial California, Spanish and Mexican California, the native Californians. And through my research, it's historical fiction. It's through the lens of those who knew Junipero Serra and interacted with him. So it's kind of unique in that sense. It was really fun writing it. And the foreword was written by Bishop Robert McElroy of San Diego, who was my professor at the University of San Francisco for the master's program. And he was just elevated to cardinal in the Catholic Church yesterday. He was the only cardinal in the Catholic Church in the United States yesterday. I'm sorry, I worded that wrong. He was the only new cardinal from the United States, and that happened yesterday in Rome. So that was really exciting. And then my third book came out of the subject when I was researching my first book. I don't know what I looked up, but I came across these writings from a California mission Indian. His name was Pablo Toc, who is connected to, he was born and raised at Mission San Luis Rey de Francia in Oceanside, California, in North San Diego County. And he's like the reverse story of Junipero Serra. He went to Mexico City, and he's like age 10 or 12 years old, and went all the way to Rome to study for the priesthood. He's like a reverse cultural exchange, because in Rome, there was a university there, and it was where seminarians or men studying for the Catholic priesthood came from all over the world to study. And he left the writings, his writings are the earliest from a California mission Indian. And he also includes like the language of his people. And it's just an amazing story. And I was like, I'm born and raised California. How have I never heard of this Pablo Toc? His name's Pablo Toc. So that book, it's a biography, and it's titled Meet Pablo Toc, Indian from the Far Shores of California. And I actually started a petition because I really think he should be recognized as a saint in the Catholic Church. And of course, that needs to go through a very formal process. But the beginning of that is a petition. You know, it's kind of a grassroots thing. And
so
more
make
research.
Your best case here. Make your best case for Pablo Toc's sainthood.
Well, the thing is, Cardinal McElroy is the Bishop of San Diego, so it'd have to go through him. So that's he's a good guy to know in regards to this. I have 600 signatories on the petition so far. Only started a few years ago. So if you just put change.org, Pablo Toc, it'll come right up. That's for sure. Yeah. So he's just a fascinating figure. And I think he gets lost in this whole controversy thing that's really been prominent since the 1970s in academic circles. And I think it's really disingenuous that those that are aware of him don't bring him up, because he is a celebration of, I think, what the Franciscans intended, you know, in terms of sharing the faith, is something to be celebrated. And I know there's different perspectives on that, but he did a lot of things, even I think a secular person would really appreciate. It's like, whoa, the language of his people, his writings there's about the history of the native tribes of Southern California. They're the earliest writings from it. So they really give a unique perspective on that whole part of history, right?
It seems like it is a very important, or maybe even central part of your scholarship, to highlight the stories and the events of lesser known figures or people who have not been known at all.
Yeah, I'm really trying to get it out there because it's really sad. And you know, that there must be a whole school of psychology and philosophy around that. And I don't know enough to really speak to it, but there must be like memory. Like, why do we remember certain people, certain things, and not others? And I know there's just too much, right? But it really nicely, I think, connects with pilgrimage, right? Because this life is fleeting, like it or not. I mean, that's a fact of life, right? And I think that's a pilgrimage kind of, for me, kind of reminds me of like that fact, and I should be better. I mean, I should be better because not only do I believe this life is temporary, I also believe in another life for eternity. So there's no time like the present, right? That rather than putting things off, and I think a pilgrimage, time with yourself and your thoughts, really helps put things into focus. Um, Communally,
Yeah, and I think it's been kind of the common person throughout history that's gone on
yeah,
pilgrimages whose stories are never
yeah,
heard.
yeah,
Are they transformational? Are they meaningful? Are did they contribute even to the local community or the religious body? Probably, and we simply don't even know
yeah.
them.
And I wonder just how important it is. But I mean, Pablo did something really amazing, and that should be recognized. And there's nothing in his, because he lived a very short life. Interestingly enough, he actually died of disease in Rome, right? During epidemics that were sweeping the city. But he made it very close to being an ordained priest, and he was going to return to California and to serve the native communities here. So he left a record which is really powerful for the rest of us. And it's very positive. And there's nothing in his story that says he was anything but holy. He was such a holy guy, and his writings really support that. We don't know anything that says otherwise. A lot of things need to be done. I mean, we need to know from the Luiseno people, which he was a member of, the Luiseno Indian peoples. Do they pray? I know for a fact that he's remembered, but we need to know those stories. And there's a lot of infighting in that community where some are federally recognized tribelets, others are not. And I think sometimes they see people like me as an outsider and they don't want to be so forthright. But I gave a talk to a wonderful group of Catholic Native Americans. They're called the Tekakwitha Conference, and in Cincinnati a couple of years ago. And they were some of them that I spoke to, I gave a presentation to, they were Luiseno, and they knew his story. And I just wish that some of them would come forward and get it in writing, that I don't know, maybe it's not there. Maybe I'm just fishing, but I'm confident that a powerful story like that is well known. It should be better known. Every school child in their textbook should learn about him. And I think that's an important part of the narrative of California mission history.
In terms of you as a pilgrim, I mean, and you've talked about you're also a teacher. Do you approach pilgrimage from from an educational perspective, or have you considered taking students with you on
Well, that's
pilgrimages?
interesting that you bring that up, because it's very timely with we're my department and I are having conversations about kind of restructuring the curriculum. We currently have theology for 3.5 years. We want to make it 4, and we want to interject electives junior year. So I think one of the ones that I'll propose is one on the history and spirituality of pilgrimages, and we'll do a local one, because where I'm on the San Francisco Peninsula. We're like midway between Mission San Francisco Diocese, which is popularly known as Mission Dolores. It's in San Francisco, and Mission Santa Clara Diocese, which is on the campus of Santa Clara University. Santa Clara is like the city just north of San Jose. So we're like right in between. And we're about 3 blocks west of El Camino Real, which I know that you and Edie Sunby Littlefield talked about the El Camino Real. And she was nice enough to, Edie's known as the mission walker, and she wrote the foreword for my last book, The Pilgrimage. Yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah,
A
she really
lovely
is.
person. Yeah.
And so maybe that would be nice to bring students on a pilgrimage. And really, your essay was so helpful to almost use as a framework for it. The different stages, and
Well, I just published I don't know, this book just came out this month maybe. There's a book called Pilgrimage as Spiritual Practice,
That's
a
it.
handbook for teachers,
That's it.
wayfarers, and guide. That one.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you've seen it. Okay, so the developmental
Yeah.
framework. I thought that's what you were referring to, but I thought, has he already
Yeah.
seen it? Because it just
Yeah.
came out.
My
Okay.
colleague who just finished the Santiago de Compostela bought it and shared that with me. So his name's Nathan Cho. He's a great guy, and he's the one that he's the one that went on 5
Okay.
pilgrimages in Spain.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that it's I mean, it's a great topic for a book too, and the compilation of essays is really interesting from an education standpoint, and for those who are guides, which is actually what prompted me to ask you the question, just because I had been involved in this project and heard a lot of the discussion around people at varying levels of educational institutions taking students on pilgrimages.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great thing to do. I think guys would be very receptive to it. I know when I share with my students, I'll talk to them about it on occasion, and they're pretty blown away. Like 800 miles? Are you kidding me? Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's a long. People who are not used to walking cannot even fathom that, and even people who are used to walking realize I maybe have a more realistic grasp on just how far that is.
Well, you know, I'm pretty sure most of us can imagine California on a map, how it looks. And the reason why it's 800 miles is because it's not a straight line. You know, you got, you're going north, and then you have to go inland a little bit and then back and so on. So El Camino Real is, most of the missions follow Highway 101 that I referred to. And then in Southern California, it becomes I-5. But you have a lot of offshoots. So that's why I remember like 2 nights before I actually went up to Sonoma and started walking, I did a Google map search, Mission Sonoma to Mission San Diego. And it's like 500 miles if you're driving, right? So you're tacking on like 300 miles to kind of really actually go to these different missions. It's not a straight line. So if you were to take a map and basically take a line from San Diego and just take like a line north to the Oregon border, it's like 850 miles, 840 miles. So what I did, and others, about 50 plus of us since 2008, I want to say, walked basically from like San Diego. It's like right up the I-5 up to the Oregon border, which that is pretty amazing when you kind of look at it that way. Because I've driven that before, from Oregon border to the Mexican border at Tijuana. It's like, that is a long way.
Yeah, people don't realize just how large the state of California is. It is massive. I mean, it's bigger than
you guys
some
are East
countries,
Coast, right? And it's like, oh, 800 miles? Whoa.
Yes.
I went through 5 states in 800 miles. You know, out here you're going through 1, you know, so much vast. Yeah, more vast.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's next for you? You're obviously very passionate about pilgrimage, and the latest book is entitled that, and it seems like while it was finished sort of in totality, the mission trail pilgrimage was finished. I assume that you already have some things that you're thinking about what you'll do next.
You know, originally I watched the movie The Way. That was when that came out with Martin Sheen, and I was like, oh, I want to do that someday. And I read a few books about it. I did a little research, and I'm like, this sounds great. I could do it with my son when he gets of age. It'll be a great thing to do, father-son bonding. And then COVID hit, but actually before COVID, I started this. And why go all the way to Spain when I got something in my own backyard? And I think I could experience religiously and spiritually some of what people experience in Spain. But I do hope someday to make it to Spain. I think that would be really wonderful experience. And it's a lot shorter too, right? So 500 miles. Like that's pretty cool. And maybe my with my son, maybe some of my siblings will go with me. That'd be really great. And professionally, in terms of writing, I'm kind of slowing down in that regard, just because of other responsibilities. And I do think I'm going to write a curriculum for a class on pilgrimage, religion, and spirituality here at Sarah, which will be that'll be time consuming, but I think really well worth it.
I taught my very first pilgrimage class over the summer, and it was something that had been in my mind for a long time, and it didn't feel like
Oh,
work at
that's
all.
great.
So yeah, it was focused on well-being. So I think that it can be really rewarding to be able to develop your own curriculum and then bring in all of the readings that have been meaningful to
Yeah.
you, and then be able to teach others is
Yeah,
really rewarding.
thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
Um, one final question. I appreciate actually that you talked about going on a pilgrimage in your own backyard. I think that resonates with a lot of people right now. You know, people have discovered sacred places because of the pandemic, right where they live, or they have looked at journeys that they may have not considered a pilgrimage and now see it
Yeah.
as a pilgrimage. So I do think the pandemic has reshaped how people view movement and travel, and what that means, and how it can be more sacred or meaningful or special. Uh, for someone who is thinking about what a pilgrimage is it really complicated? Can you offer some final thoughts about
No, I
that?
think there's so much information out there. It's amazing. Even at your fingertip on World Wide Web, there's so much information on making pilgrimages. Practically speaking, for the California mission walkers, you have Butch Brierie's guidebook, and that's a go left, go right, a little summary of what you'll see and so on, which is very helpful to people. Um, but in terms of in your own backyard, you know, I don't know if a pilgrimage, if it's necessary to have pain. I experienced pain. I'm bald, as you can see, and early on I had my hat on. I'm pretty good about that, and being so fair skinned, and lotion, sunscreen, and I remember the top of my head being hot for like 2 days. It was like heat was coming off of my head, even after I showered and cooled down and slept. So I learned I'm going to put a headscarf or something around there to help add for comfort. And I don't need it. I lost toenails. I ran out of water. I don't know if people necessarily have to go through that to get a good pilgrimage experience. You could do research. There's books out there. You could drive them. You could do it virtually, like I said. And of course, I mean, the reason I point this out is it's a myth that the friars walked everywhere. They took mules on occasion. Um, yes, the Franciscans and their spirituality at the time was about like not to take handouts, and there should be some element of physical sacrifice and things of that nature. But Sarah himself didn't walk everywhere. He took ships, he took mules. He did walk a lot, and they did walk a lot. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Um, but I don't know if you have to do the whole walking part, right? To deepen the person you're becoming from what you were, And I guess that in the movie The Way, what makes a true pilgrim, right? That guy from Ireland, the writer, the travel writer. Yeah, I think that's an ongoing question for everyone. I think the key is just getting started and getting out there and pushing the envelope of what you're comfortable with, because it could be a really profound experience.
I think that's a good place to stop. Beyond, we can all of your books. I've found them at various outlets,
Hmm.
Amazon being one. Do you have a
Yeah, it's
personal website?
missions 1769.com or missions1769.com. That's the year that Sarah came to San Diego, 1769. So,
All right. Well,
all
thank you
right.
so much. It's it's been really nice to
Thank
talk
you.
to you,
Thank you so
Christian.
much.
Thank you for listening to Meaningful Journeys. This program is supported in part by Antioch University, New England, and the Meaningful Life Institute. We would love to connect with you on social media, on Instagram, on Twitter, and Facebook, or by email, info@meaningfuljourneys.net, or our website, www.meaningfuljourneys.net. We hope you will join us next time on our shared quest for meaning as we connect humanity one step at a time.